Hi everybody! This training was created to focus on the IDEA topic of parental participation, and this training was created with the intended audience being parents of students with special needs in the public school system. There are 3 learning objectives created for the purpose of this training. The first objective is that parents and guardians will be able to identify and explain their rights during the evaluation and IEP development processes. The second objective is that parents and guardians will be able to describe the overview of the IEP process. And the third objective is parents and guardians will be able to identify at least 3 reasons why their involvement and participation is important. At this point, I would have attendees participate in this Kahoot game to serve as a pre-assessment and see what they already know about the content we will be covering in this training. This same quiz will be given again at the end of the training. On this slide, I would play this video that breaks down an overview of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Now we're going to go over some key points of the IDEA. So as we already learned, the IDEA stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This act was originally established in 1990. It was then amended in 1997 and 2004. With some additional changes and additions. The purpose, as stated in the IDEA of the Act, is to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living, to ensure that the rights of children with disabilities and parents of such children are protected, to assist states, localities, educational service agencies, and federal agencies to provide for the education of all children with disabilities. The IDEA requires that special education and related services be provided to eligible students between the ages of 3 and 21. And the IDEA also includes a list of 13 categories of eligible exceptionalities. What does the IDEA mean for parents and guardians of students with special needs? Well, there are several procedural safeguards set in place by the IDEA for parents. The first is that there is a guaranteed free education for students with disabilities. This means there are 0 financial obligations for parents and guardians of these students, as this is all funded publicly. The next is a 0 reject clause put in place by the Act. This means that all eligible students with disabilities are guaranteed a free, appropriate public education, regardless of the severity of their disability. Informed consent must be obtained from parents and guardians before initial evaluations and initial placements. Next, there must be prior notice given to parents and guardians before the school's initiating or changing or refusing to initiate or change the student's identification, evaluation, or educational placement. Continuing on from the previous slide regarding guarantees and rights established by the IDEA for parents and guardians of students with disabilities. If parents disagree with a school's evaluation of their child, they have the right to obtain an individual evaluation at public expense. The school also must give the parents information regarding where these evaluations can be obtained per the request of the parents. Parents can request a due process hearing if they disagree with the school about the identification, evaluation, placement of the student, or anything at all regarded to their right to a free, appropriate public education. The IDEA also included a stay put provision, which means that student placement or programs cannot be changed without agreement of both the parents and the school. Next, we're going to take a look at 2 different notable court cases related to parental participation under the IDEA. The first case we're going to look at is the case of Doug C. versus the Hawaii Department of Education, which was ruled and decided in 2013. Doug C. was the father of an 18-year-old child with autism, and he requested twice to have his child's IEP meeting rescheduled so that he would be able to attend. The school decided to proceed with the meeting without the presence of the father, despite his 2 requests, and they scheduled a follow-up meeting with the father afterwards. They thought that this would be sufficient. The father rejected the IEP at the follow-up meeting. He found it insufficient, but it was already adopted by the school. This case was taken to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which in fact ruled the case in favor of the father and the child. And as stated by the court, the agency was required to include the child's parents in the IEP creation process unless the parent affirmatively refuses to participate. This case also found, because the initial reason that the school decided to proceed with the meeting without the presence of the father was because the IEP due date was coming up. The court also decided and ruled that the presence of the father was more important than meeting the deadline of the IEP reevaluation. The second case we're going to look at is the Florence County School District 4 versus Shannon Carter, which was ruled in 1993. In this case, Shannon Carter was a student in 9th grade, and during her 9th grade year, she was identified as having a learning disability. The school met with Carter's parents to create an IEP. After the creation of the IEP, Shannon's parents were unhappy with the IEP and believed that it was inadequate under the defining principles of the IDEA, and they requested a hearing. While waiting for the results of the hearing, Shannon's parents enrolled her in a private school, and this private school did not meet all of the requirements of the IDEA. When the hearing was upheld that the IEP created was inadequate, the parents sued the school district for reimbursement of private school tuition, since they had not upheld Shannon Carter's right to a free, appropriate public education. In response to this, the school district argued that reimbursement was not required because the private school that they placed Shannon Carter in was not in complete compliance with the IDEA. This case ended up going all the way up to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court unanimously ruled in a 9-0 verdict that Carter's parents would receive reimbursement, and the IDEA requirements do not apply to private parental placements. Both of these court cases help to emphasize and establish the importance and necessity of parental participation in the IEP process, as well as the level of control that parents ultimately have over their students' education. Next, we're going to talk about a brief overview of the IEP process, but before presenting the information about this IEP process, I would ask attendees to turn and talk to the other participants they are sitting next to and try to come up with an order of steps of the IEP process. So they would be able to collaborate and talk about what they already know and try to come up with that order of steps in the IEP process together before learning about it from the training. Let's briefly talk about an overview of the IEP process. So the first step of the IEP process is the referral. The student is referred for a formal evaluation, usually by school personnel such as their teacher or the student's parents. Step 2 is the evaluation. In order for the evaluation to take place, parental consent must be obtained first, and then a formal evaluation of the student is conducted, and this evaluation includes assessments of their academic and functional performances. The third step is eligibility determination. In this step, it is determined whether the student, first of all, has a disability, and second of all, if this disability affects their academic and functional performance to the extent that they need a special education service. If the answer is yes to both of these questions, then we move forward in the IEP process. Step 4 is the development of the IEP. In this step, the IEP team, in collaboration with the student, if possible, and the student's parents or guardians, meet to develop an individualized education plan for the student. Step 5 is the IEP implementation. In this step, the IEP is implemented as soon as possible after the development of the IEP. Step 6 is the annual review. This happens once a year. Student progress towards meeting their IEP goals is evaluated within 12 months of the previous IEP development. And step 7 is the reevaluation, which occurs at least every 3 years. During this step, the student is reevaluated to see if they still qualify for their special education services and if any changes need to be made to their placement. Here's a list of some IEP tips for parents and guardians. First, parents have the right to request for the school to provide you with copies of any evaluations of the student and the proposed goals and proposed placement recommendations prior to IEP meetings. Parents can also ask for a draft of the IEP in advance or ask for a blank copy of the IEP form. This allows you to review the components of the IEP and ask questions as needed. Parents should prepare their own list of issues that they feel are important to the education of the student and a list of questions to be addressed during the meeting. It's also important for parents to review the list of participants for the meeting, and this is provided by the school through their written notice of the meeting. They need to ensure that the necessary team members will be there and notify the school if they plan to have somebody from outside of the school attending with them. It's important that they know that they can bring an advocate. If needed, parents should take extra time to review, think, and request changes after the meeting. There's no pressure to sign off on the IEP at the meeting. Finally, it's important that parents know their rights in regard to the IEP process. Let's talk about why parental participation is so important, especially in the cases of students with special needs. First and foremost, you know your child the best, and you provide the full picture of what your child needs. As stated in the 2004 reauthorization of the IDEA, almost 30 years of research and experience has demonstrated that the education of children with disabilities can be made more effective by strengthening the role and responsibility of parents and ensuring that families have meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their children at school and at home. Now we're going to look at 5 different findings that research has consistently shown over the last several years. Research has shown that in cases where parents are actively involved in their students' education, first, students have higher GPAs and higher scores on standardized tests. Second, students are enrolled in more challenging academic programs. Third, students typically have better attendance. Fourth, students have improved behavior, both at home and at school. And fifth, students have better social skills and are better adapted to school. This is a list of some professional associations and advocacy organizations that I think would be exceptionally helpful for parents. And to wrap up the training, we will retake the Kahoot quiz that we took before the beginning of the training to make sure that everybody learned from this training and understood the key components of this training. We will end the training with a time for open discussion and a question and answer panel for any questions related to the content of the training. And finally, here's my list of references that I used to put together the content for this training. Thank you for listening.